challenging times.
My life in the sunshine. Everybody loves the sunshine. Sunshine. Everybody loves the sunshine.
I'm Tavis Smiley, and I am delighted to have you along with us today as we commence the second hour of our program. When we reflect on the glaring inequities of our time, two questions stand boldly before us. Why does the exploitation of black communities persist, and what can we do about it? In this hour, please be joined by a leading voice in the pursuit of social justice and racial equality, Dr. Andrea S. Boyles, Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Belonging at Tulane University. Shout out to WBOK, 1230 a.m. in that fine city. And she's also president-elect. We congratulate her on this, president-elect of the Association of Black Sociologists. Against the backdrop of yesterday's news regarding the settlement with Henrietta Lacks's family, if you didn't see that news, you should. Huge deal. By the way, our lead guest tomorrow is the lawyer for the family of Henrietta Lacks, who pulled off this amazing deal yesterday, Ben Crump. Tomorrow's lead guest is attorney Ben Crump. You don't want to miss that conversation. But in case you didn't hear, huge settlement yesterday announced with one of the companies that used the HeLa cells of Ben Crump. No dollar figure was announced yesterday, but trust and believe it was a huge number. You can also trust and believe that Ben Crump is going to go to one company at a time and get them to settle as well. The fact that the first shoe drop means that there are many more shoes to drop. And again, we may never know the numbers, but my sense is this may be a billion-dollar ordeal. If you're getting, $100 million or more from each company, and all of these companies wrongly stole, took, used, and profited from the HeLa sales of this, from the sales of this black woman, Henrietta Lacks, then just do the math yourself. But we'll talk to Ben Crump and see if we can get out of him tomorrow when he joins us at the top of our show on Thursday. But again, against the backdrop of that news yesterday, finally some justice for the family of this black woman whose cells were used improperly, and several other trending news stories, including the disproportionate environmental health burdens faced by black folk during this heat wave. We discussed that a couple of days ago. New data suggesting that black folk are dying faster than anybody else because of our exposure to this extreme heat. And then, of course, the controversy surrounding historical narratives in Florida schools and Ron DeSantis' nonsense. There's a lot that underscores this conversation about the historical and ongoing exploitation of black communities and how we can collectively address this pressing issue. As I said, no better person to talk to about that than Dr. Andrea S. Boyles, the president-elect of the Association of Black Sociologists. Dr. Boyles, good to have you back on this program once again.
Thank you. I appreciate being back on.
No, I'm glad to have you. I'm glad we have an hour to talk about all the stuff I just sort of laid out. Let me start with this. We just spent an hour talking with Adam Schiff, the congressman out of California, Democrat, of course, who led the House impeachment inquiry of Donald Trump, the first one. And he was the lead manager in the Senate impeachment inquiry of Donald Trump. So a great exclusive for this program to have Adam Schiff lead us off today. And then we talked to the brilliant Connie Rice and Professor Alan Jenkins out of Harvard Law. So the entire first hour was about this third and historic indictment of Donald Trump yesterday. My only question for you is this. Can you imagine? I love doing this. Can you imagine if Donald Trump were black, how this might have played out? How it might not have taken this long to already see him wearing an orange jumpsuit behind prison bars. Can you imagine were he black, that every time he gets indicted, his poll numbers go up and that his loyal base continues to be all kind of upset about this being an encroachment on his campaign? Can you imagine for the moment, since we're talking about the ways in which black folk have been exploited and the legacy of devaluation, if Donald Trump were black, can you just imagine that for a moment?
Well, I'll do you one better, Tavis.
Okay.
I will have us think about, President Barack Obama and all the fallout from him wearing a tan suit, right? So, we can just start with, we don't even have to get deep, right? And get into, these criminological issues. We can just start with that and the superficial, ways in which folks were attacking him throughout his presidency. And not only that, going into it and subsequent to it. So, that is certainly an example, one of many, one of countless, in fact, where we see different, kinds of responses, racialized responses at that.
We do have now in the rearview mirror, thanks to the rearview mirror, we have some perspective now on the way the country treated or maltreated, accepted or did not accept this historic moment when Barack Obama does, in fact, become the first African-American president. We're talking again in this hour about the historical and ongoing exploitation of black communities, the devaluation of black life in this country. That's our topic writ large in this hour. But since we're there, let me just pursue that line, excuse me, that line of thinking for just a moment here. Again, with some distance, what's your read on the way the country handled or not so well the tenure of Obama as president for 8 years, this black man?
So, I just think, let me say this. So, my context is always situated in historical circumstances, and, I by far am not certainly the leader of the United States, but as a servant leader in various ways, one of the things that I preference my presidency or leadership with is I always tell folks, listen, I'm one individual, right? And I cannot alone single-handedly change the racial dynamics, 400 plus years worth of racial dynamics as one individual. It takes a collective. And so I think it is in that space that I particularly as a social scientist and otherwise try to think about, whether black leadership is at the presidential level, for example, with President Obama, or whether that is at, the local level with some of our nonprofits or, organizations and so forth, that it takes a collective, and one person alone cannot change the historical front of all of oppression as it relates to black America.
Yep. Powerful point. We'll probe that, interrogate that a little further when we come forward. Our guest in this hour, Dr. Andrea S. Boyles of Tulane University.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
MC Light, for AARP, hip-hop, the cultural phenomenon that took New York by storm in 1973, is celebrating 50 years of rocking mics and crowds. Whether you're a ride-or-die hip-hop head or simply curious about its origins, check out the latest issue of AARP, the magazine. It celebrates this incredible milestone with a featured story brimming with fun hip-hop facts and history. Head over to aarp.org/black community to learn more.
Community is more than where you live. It's the people in it who go above and beyond to help it thrive. During the 50th anniversary of hip-hop and the 75th anniversary of black radio, AARP recognizes the members, volunteers, people, and partners giving back to our communities. We believe when our efforts drive change for the greater good, we all thrive together. To learn more about how AARP supports efforts to keep our communities thriving, visit aarp.org/black community.
Have you heard about Lendistry? Lendistry is a national black-led small business lender that is headquartered right here in LA. Once you've started your business, Lendistry provides flexible financing options starting at $50,000 to help you access the affordable capital needed to grow. Whether financing is needed to increase working capital, acquire a business, purchase inventory and equipment, or refinance debt, Lendistry has a solution for you. Lending products range from traditional business term loans and non-revolving lines of credit to SBA 7A loans and commercial commercial real estate financing. Lendistry's pre-application process is simple and does not impact your credit score. Visit lendistry.com/KBLA to learn more and to get started with an application right from the website.
The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
Helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
We continue our conversation now with Tulane's Dr. Andrea S. Boyles, the president-elect of the Association of Black Sociologists. One final question, since we're talking about the Obama era as compared to all the drama that Donald Trump is in. I assume, Dr. Boyles, that it had to be good for the psychology and, for that matter, the sociology of black people that Obama did, in fact, serve for 8 years. Essentially, when it comes to scandal, served honorably and left the White House as the first black president sort of unscathed, certainly as compared to Donald Trump or any number of other presidents that we've had in this country.
Yes, my thought immediately is that, this is the fallout. All of these things that we've been watching, right? Mm-hmm. This increase of, racism and racist behavior in and out of politics, from, various groups that have increased since Obama's administration, and thereafter, but then on into what we currently see happening with the White House and, the slate of candidates that are running and the platform on which they're running, and the suggestion or exploitation or promotion, however we want to think about it and talk about it in terms of racist policies and things like that. All of those things seem to be subsequent to, right, this 8 years with this first, with our very first black African-American president. And so I'm not lost on that. And I think that a large segment of our nation is also very, very tuned into that. Yep.
You are a sociologist, obviously, and you're about to lead this organization. So let me ask you a question that takes us right into your work as a sociologist. And you sort of teed this up, and I wanted to go there anyway. So you're also prophetic and prescient, in addition to being a brilliant thinker. I think you're right about that, and I've said that before. It seems to me that the election of Donald Trump itself was, in fact, in part, a response to the election twice of Barack Obama. And I could point to any number of other issues. Again, you've already kind of teed this up for us. I can point to any number of other issues that suggest to me that we are experiencing and witnessing in real time, on a variety of levels, in myriad ways, a sort of pushback against black life. And when you study history, that's not uncommon. Whenever there are significant advances made by black folk, you can rest assured there's going to be a pushback. I've told this story before. I'll tell it once again. I was with my now departed friend, Harry Belafonte, Mr. B, as I called him, around the time of the election of Barack Obama. And I remember the conversation and will remember it for the rest of my life. He was thrilled that he lived long enough to see the election of the first black president. And yet he was sore afraid, because he knew that he'd lived long enough to know that the election of Barack Obama, this important moment in American history, was going to ultimately lead to a backlash. And when I tell you that he was fretting and fearing what was to come because of this huge step forward that we had taken, my spirit was uneased or diseased by that commentary from Mr. Belafonte. I could feel the pain and anguish that he was processing, because he again knew there's going to be a price to pay for this. And so here you come now making that same point. So I'm wondering, as a sociologist, whether you can unpack for us why that is, and more importantly, how we process our way through these moments where we see the backlash against us because some people just don't like seeing black folk progress, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, and so what I would say is that, rest in peace and power and all those things to Harry Belafonte. But what I would say is that he had a sociological perspective and took a sociological approach in how he was thinking about things. He had anticipation, is what I'm hearing from you, in terms of what was to come regarding racism. And why did he have that anticipation? Because what he was accounting for is this longstanding pattern of behavior, white behaviors, particularly in the United States, where anytime there's been black progress, there's also been a simultaneous attempt with white regress. And so what I tune into also similarly is the fact that, yes, I talk about in my work this rebirth, right? This rebirthing of whiteness. And I've written pieces around the idea of birth of a nation, right? And how, this rebirth happens after during and after President Obama's administration. And basically what I am saying is that there seems to be, for every step that black folks have taken through fight, right, to advance in this nation, there's simultaneously been this recalling and reclaiming, so to speak, of whiteness and white positioning and all out, in many respects, this notion to advance white ownership of this country, of people, of, various human standards, of laws, policies, and practices, and all those things. And so we have to, like Harry Belafonte, we have to be anticipating, right? We have to be knowledgeable of these patterns. There's a saying that if you don't know history, history will repeat itself. Well, interestingly, this is why history is right now being attacked in attempts to erase it, because the idea is to have this rebirthing happen and have this rebirthing of whiteness, so it seems, to occur in a way that leaves people sort of imbalanced. Black people particularly, to leave people sort of, sort of tossing and turning and unstable in a way where they can't figure out what the next move should be for their communities and otherwise. And so I say that we have to be wise, we have to be watchful, right? Which then again leads into this whole idea of being woke, right? And so there is an attack being on that, but we have to anticipate attacks, racial attacks and otherwise, based on historical circumstances.
What is to be done? Excuse me. I love the frame you've put us in. When you think about Birth of a Nation, that film that has been written about and talked about, documentaries have been done about it. Just not a high moment in Hollywood or in American culture. That film, The Birth of a Nation, and yet I hear you talk now about the rebirth of whiteness in this moment, in this experiment in democracy. What is to be done about this rebirth of whiteness, as you put it?
Well, there's racial fear, right? A lot of that is rooted in, and I would say that there's this calculation that's tied historically to black labor, physically, emotionally, mentally, and otherwise across places and spaces that on some level or another is always benefiting to predominantly white economics and political empowerment. And that happens without expiration. And so when I talk about, this reclaiming, it is sort of like re-solidifying, an attempt to re-solidify all those things. This country is increasingly becoming a black and brown majority. And so there is this underlying racial fear that continuously, is used to project ideas of whiteness and the supposedly superiority of it. And so there's a constant need to re-up or one-up, so to speak, when it comes to Black advancement. And so it's about, this is why we constantly see things where there are these political attempts and otherwise to sort of balance the scales, or to have these debates, these superficial debates about Blackness and whether it's Blackness and what that means in terms of danger or the lack thereof, or what does that mean in terms of, and when I talk about danger, I mean we can run a gamut. Danger in people losing their jobs, danger in terms of crime, danger in terms of, political power, and, what does that mean, and what would the fallout be for white America, and those kinds of things. That happens repeatedly in subtle ways, but obviously in even more overt ways. And so this is why we are even seeing the rollback of various policies and, and all sorts of things in a more egregious way, because again, it comes full circle to this constant practice and these constant behavioral strategies where we see this constant advancement of Black people, even though it's slow and incremental over 400 years, this need to sort of one up again and reinsert the power, this supposed power or the idea of whiteness as superiority, trying to reinsert that in various ways as a reminder to people, which is always happening, at the deficit, an increasingly deficit and the disparity of Black and brown people.
So talk to me then about what you call the intersectionality of exploitation, the intersectionality of exploitation.
So again, there's this intersecting dynamic, again, that plays out, which I mentioned earlier, that somehow lingers around these economic and political calculations that have historically been tied to Black labor. And when I talk about Black labor, I'm meaning labor not just necessarily physically, but we can even think about the exploitation of Black labor emotionally, how we labor with these emotional dynamics, the fallout of racist policies and practices, right? Mentally and all those kinds of things. But that happens across places and spaces and time, right? And in any circumstance, they're always and only occurring as a calculation that is made by predominantly white, affluent folk, largely white men particularly, who have decided that it is in that exploitation, it is in the leveraging of Black labor in all those different ways that somehow or another seems to benefit or contrarily endanger their economic and political positions and empowerment. And so that is an ongoing thing. And so in those three ways, again, Black labor across places and spaces, and how together collectively all those things benefit economic and political white empowerment without expiration, we can pretty much tie all of these actions, past to present, across predominantly white America to those circumstances.
As I mentioned, our lead guest on tomorrow's program is Ben Crump, the lawyer for the Henrietta Lacks family. We'll talk about this huge settlement that was announced yesterday with one of the companies that exploited her, speaking of exploitation, exploited her sales, and there are many companies that have done that. So trust and believe there'll be more of these settlements to come as long as Ben Crump's on the case for the family of Henrietta Lacks. But how does that story fit into this intersectionality of exploitation of Black people?
So, Henrietta Lacks' story is par for the course, right? And I want to say my heart goes out to her family. I pay homage to all that they've had to endure and that they continue to face in the days ahead, trying to acquire some measure of justice, which could never fully be accounted for, right? Because there's no dollar amount ever that can, or otherwise that can fully satisfy what happened with her and her life, and what that has been used to be and mean for the prosperity and the longevity of white America, and particularly white America, particularly tied to experimentation science and a number of industries, right? So when I think about her, it is also within historical context that she is one of countless incidents, or instances where we've seen this medical exploitations, these economic exploitations, and otherwise, again, that's tied to physical exploitation and the laboring of Black folks in different ways and across spaces and so forth. So even if we're thinking about this in the medical industry, we can think about this also in terms of, James Sims of the 1800s and the exploitation of enslaved Black women like Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, who we refer to as the mothers of gynecology, right?
Yep.
And the constant exploitation of that and the idea that millions, and we continue to live in a world where those three Black women, enslaved Black women, young girls at the time, in fact, had been used, as experimentation for gynecology. And so you've got white women and women, across races, across and around the world, in fact, not just tied to the United States, around the world who are benefiting constantly from the experimentation of those three enslaved Black women whose families did not gain or benefit from. So I just sort of want to provide context for how we still see cases like 1950s, Henrietta Lacks emerge in these, in these dynamics. And I'm going to stay tuned and be watching, but it's more of the same, where our people continue to be exploited physically and otherwise, and then without gain.
I see the context. We'll continue talking about the legacy of exploitation and devaluation when we come forward with Dr. Andrea S. Boyles on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go: shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms: irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit notimetowait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol-Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
Parents, we know we can't protect our kids from everything. Eventually, they're going to bump their heads or scrape their knees. But we can protect them from 6 types of cancer. HPV, or human papillomavirus, is a common preventable virus that can cause cancer later in life. The HPV vaccine prevents human papillomavirus and all the cancers it can cause. The American Cancer Society recommends getting your sons and daughters the HPV vaccine starting at age 9 to protect them later in life.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Former President Donald Trump is due to be arraigned tomorrow in Washington on 4 counts related to his alleged efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. In announcing the indictment yesterday, Special Counsel Jack Smith said his office will push for a speedy trial and that he and his team are ready to have all of the evidence tested in a court of law. A new national monument in Chicago, Illinois, honoring Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, is official. A placard was unveiled yesterday to recognize Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ in Bronzeville as a national monument. The 14-year-old black child from Chicago was kidnapped, beaten, and brutally murdered in Mississippi by white supremacists back in 1955. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
An accident working on the Santa Monica Freeway eastbound just before the 110. Traffic is backed up to Vermont Avenue. Very heavy on the West 10 coming away from the 5 over to Alameda Street and then up ahead from Normandy Avenue out to Robertson. Slowing on the 5 northbound drive coming away from the 710 to the Glendale Freeway.
Wendy's is open until midnight or later, which means all your favorite menu items are up later too. The Baconator still tastes just as juicy and bacony at night, so listen to that craving and turn in for the night at a Wendy's drive-thru. Hours may vary at participating U.S. Wendy's.
Hi, I'm Kyle at Blindster.com. At Blindster, we offer over 50 different custom window treatments, including faux wood blinds and shutters, all at prices less than retail. Plus, we'll send you free samples before you buy. Don't hire an expensive pro. Do it yourself and save big at Blindster.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Dodgers right fielder Mookie Betts hit his 28th homer of the season. The Dodgers beat Oakland by 4. The Dodgers needed the offense Right-hander Lance Lynn, making his Dodgers debut, gave up 3 homers. The Dodgers pitching staff has given up 35 runs in the last 6 games. There have been 3 no-hitters in Major League Baseball this season. The third happened last night. Houston left-hander Framber Valdez shut down Cleveland on just 93 pitches. The Rams are worried about wide receiver Cooper Kupp. Kupp walked off the field during Tuesday's practice and did not return. Kupp suffered a hamstring injury while running a pass route. No word yet on how long the Rams' best receiver will be sidelined. The 30-year-old Kupp missed the final 8 games last year with an ankle injury that requires surgery in the offseason. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to The Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment contributors in the business as we break down what's going on, who's got next, and what not to miss. Only on The Raw Report with Robin Ayers.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Contracts, and grants. This is Rambo, and I'm back August 5th. Contracts, and grants. I'll be at the Westin Hotel, LAX, Saturday, August 5th. Me and my guests are fast-paced in the contracts and grants. They only speak 6 minutes each. I have LA County, I have the city. I even have Everett, the CEO of Lindustry, coming to talk to you guys. And for the first time ever, I have Metro's Director of Certification coming. We average over 700 attendees, so you know the rules. Parking's about $15 with the event validation, event, coffee, snacks, all free, paid for by Rambo and Lindustry. And yes, you can bring guests. So save your seat, DeonRambo.com. Listen, contract ready's only 2 hours from 10 a.m. to 12. But if you get there around 9:30, I'll probably be doing some Q&As and things like that before the events I never get a chance to do. I honestly keep saying, I don't know what's more important for LA businesses right now than local contracts. So I'm back, Westin Hotel, LAX, Saturday, August 5th. August 5th. It takes 2 minutes to register. DeonRambo.com. Go register now. DeonRambo.com.
Made fresh daily in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley, but you're also listening to Dr. Andrea S. Boyles, who is at Tulane University and is the president-elect of the Association of Black Sociologists. Later in today's program, we'll be talking to some black chemists. This is the 50th anniversary of a major organization, specifically the National Organization for the Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. And yes, they do exist. Black chemists do exist. They're celebrating 50 years of this organization. So we're going to take a few minutes of today's program to just celebrate black chemists. We oftentimes don't talk about the success that black folk are having in industries like this one. And so we'll unpack that and celebrate them on their 50th anniversary a little bit later in today's program. But right now, we're celebrating the Association of Black Sociologists with their president-elect, again, Dr. Andrea S. Boyles, as we talk about the intersectionality of exploitation and the legacy of devaluation that I want to get to right now when it comes to African-American people. It continues unabated. Even as we move toward this moment that Dr. Boyles referenced earlier, where for the first time in this nation's history, America will be comprised of more people of color than good white folk. And that in itself is going to be a moment that I want to ask her about right now before I get to this notion of this ongoing legacy of devaluation. So since you referenced it earlier, Dr. Boyles, let me ask you specifically what your sense is. I can tell you now what Fox News is thinking. I can tell you what Tucker Carlson is thinking and many others. I can tell what Ron DeSantis and others are thinking about this moment that we are inexorably hurtling toward, where for the first time ever, once again, white folk will be outnumbered in this country. What's your sense of what that moment is going to bring when we finally arrive in that space?
Well, one of the things that it, again, brings to mind is racial fear. there's been a significant amount of constructing of race since the very beginning, the onset of even the transatlantic enslavement, about race and blackness supposedly being idealized as inferior, comparable to whiteness, right? And so this capitalization has existed all of these many centuries off of that premise. And the idea that now there is this increasing number of black folks and brown folks who will, in many respects, not only be outnumbering in some respect compared to white people in this nation, but then what does that mean in terms of political power, right? Mm-hmm. This is why you, in economic positioning and all those sorts of things that come in tandem to that. This is why we see such a great fight with gerrymandering and all these kinds of things. There is this, basically what I'm saying to you is that we can watch the pattern and we can watch like this ongoing, this very exhaustive race to try to reconstruct all of these different areas, politically and otherwise, that might mean a loss of white power. And the idea that white people somehow is constructed historically by them as being superior. And this projection that is happening as a result of it. And so there is this idea of all the centuries of oppression that has been leveraged to black people and brown people. Now white people in some respects are fearful that they will face the same thing. If the dynamics change racially, then what does that mean for them? Will they then become subject to the same amount of oppression or worse that they leveraged to black folks throughout the history of this country? Will they then be facing the same kinds of, disparity and disparagement in their everyday existence that black folks have had to contend with and otherwise throughout the duration and prior to the establishment of this country? Those kinds of things are what we see manifesting. When we see these extreme measures being taken, we can pretty much bank not just on the fact that I'm saying that as a sociologist, mm-hmm. but I'm saying that based on a lot of the conversations that people are having. They themselves admit to that based on the conspiracy theories that we see pervasively happening across this nation, based on also historical trends and the ideas, again, to reinsert and sort of try to re-up and rebirth these very desperate moves in terms of, maintaining whiteness and white ownership and whiteness as this idealized space and place for, humanity as a template.
The OJs had a song many years ago that many of us know that said, your body's here with me, but your mind is on the other side of town. My body is in this studio with you as you're on the phone joining us from New Orleans, but I must confess that my mind went not just to the other side of town, but all the way to South Africa while you were talking, and I think you probably know where I'm going. When you talk about the fear that many whites in this country have, and you see it playing itself out, as you said, brilliantly in a lot of ways, because they know we're headed toward this day where they will, for once, for the first time, be outnumbered. But in South Africa, as you well know, this audience knows, smart audience, black folk in South Africa always outnumbered white folk in South Africa, all during apartheid. The numbers of black folk were always greater, of course, than the numbers of white folk. And yet the white folk held all the power, they had all the control, they had all the money, etc., etc., etc. When those black folk finally took over on the political front, given the end, the bringing down of apartheid, black folk take over politically. We all know the story. Nelson Mandela becomes the first black president in the history of South Africa. We just celebrated Mandela Day a couple of weeks ago on this program, and in fact, for that matter, around the globe. We talked about this then. I come back to that now. So Mandela becomes the first black president, then Thabo Mbeki, and so now we're into a series of black presidents in the country of South Africa. Why do I raise that? Because black folk, again, have always outnumbered white folk there. But when the black folk got the power, other than having the reins of political power, ain't nothing much else changed. Economically, nothing, frankly, has really changed in South Africa. And so to the extent there's any critique of Nelson Mandela, and for those who followed him as president, including Mbeki and others, the argument is that they haven't done enough to change the economics of life for black folk in South Africa. So I say all that to get back to your point. when black folk and brown folk are essentially, I'm putting this in air quotes for those watching me right now, when black folk and black folk and brown folk rather, are essentially running things in this country, what does it really mean if nothing changes for black people economically, and economically we continue to be exploited and devalued? There's a mouthful there, but do you take my question?
Yes, the thing that comes to mind, and I want to be clear, it's not just an outnumbering in terms of black populations or numbers of black folks in South Africa. Tavis, we can have that conversation globally, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we think about the calculation and numbers of black folks just globally on earth, and what that means and looks like, and still the fact that there is so much oppression for black people still playing out around the globe, the diaspora, right?
Mm-hmm.
More specific to the United States, what I would argue, or even the globe, what I would argue is that there's a particular ideology, right, that comes attached to the ways in which race in and of itself has been constructed, right? And the ideology is that, that has been crafted by predominantly white folks, historically around whiteness being superior, right? And so you can have this increasing or these numbers of black folks around the world, but if the ideological positioning is still one of whiteness somehow equating to these ideas of superiority, which again is crafted and constructed by white people, if that is the ideological basis for how these systems and these various institutions and the ways in which people interact with them, if that is the basis for all of these economic and political dynamics that we deal with globally or within the U.S., if that is maintained, then we are still up against, right? Because, go on.
No. So let me do this. When we come forward, I want to interrogate that framework. I hear your point loud and clear, and you're right. If that frame stays the same, we're back to my friend Connie Rice. Get your frame right. If that frame, that ideological frame, stays the same, what does it mean that people of color will be running things in this country years from now? We'll do that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go: shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms: irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit notimetowait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol-Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
Parents, we know we can't protect our kids from everything. Eventually, they're going to bump their heads or scrape their knees. But we can protect them from 6 types of cancer. HPV, or human papillomavirus, is a common, preventable virus that can cause cancer later in life. The HPV vaccine prevents human papillomavirus and all the cancers it can cause. The American Cancer Society recommends getting your sons and daughters the HPV vaccine starting at age 9 to protect them later in life.
Can you believe it's already back to school season? To get you ready, Chase is hosting a family event at its Crenshaw Community Center branch on Wednesday, August 2nd from 4 to 8 p.m. Chase will be giving away backpacks full of school supplies and other goodies to the first 1,000 attendees. There will be activities for the whole family to enjoy. Chase community managers will host financial health workshops for parents and kids to learn about the importance of budgeting and smart spending when preparing for back to school. Plus, there will also be lawn games and crafts for all ages. Visit chase.com/student banking to learn about Chase's family banking solutions. We hope to see you at Chase's back to school event at its Crenshaw Community Center branch on Wednesday, August 2nd. JP Morgan Chase Bank N.A. Member FDIC.
For all of us, this generation and the next, there is simply no place in our lives for litter. And yet, it's everywhere we look, and unfortunately, it does belong to all of us. So let's come together and create a litter-free, clean California once and for all. Remember to properly dispose of your trash and recycling. Secure truckloads with tarps to keep debris from flying out. Clean out your car when you're at the gas station. Take pride in your community by organizing a cleanup event or join a cleanup event near you. Zero litter is the goal. Join us at cleanca.com. That's cleanca.com. Let's do it together. Brought to you by Caltrans. cleanca.com.
Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
Indeed, Dr. Boyles, you were saying a moment ago that so long as this ideological framework persists, that white is better and that white domination is the end game, then it doesn't so much matter whether black folk outnumber white folk in South Africa or black folk plus other people of color outnumber white folk in the United States of America. Continue your point, please.
Yes, I will say this. I am thinking about, and let me give you an example. I'm thinking about the fact that there was a time in history when we think about enslavement, there were a select few, very, very few black folks that did own themselves Africans as slaves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they did that because there was a benefit. There were social benefits attached to it, right? And so even though they themselves were in some ways and providing different reasons under different circumstances for why they did it, it happened. It was a thing. Far and few comparably, but it was a thing. My point in saying that is this, Tavis. We can have black folks, yes, well-positioned in all sorts of places, and we do currently around the globe and more specifically within this nation. But if at the root of these systems, right, there is still this ideological positioning that whiteness is better and whiteness is superior, as still very reflective of the imperialistic ways in which whiteness and all other races had been constructed by them, if that continues to be the dynamic, the driving dynamic for all these circumstances that we see, black folks, if they are not cognizant of that and socialized and empowered in ways to advance their community, they will grift too.
Yeah.
We see few people that will grift, that will use that as an opportunity, like black folks during enslavement, to use it as social capital and ways in which to maneuver and advance themselves, not necessarily their community, but themselves. And so we have to be very careful. What we talk about in our community, and Tab, as you are well aware, there is a distinction between being skin folk and kin folk, right? And so we have to be very, very clear. But again, at the root of the fact that we can make that distinction and we can have a conversation about black folks who grift in different ways that are decimating to our community, that are also black folks who then work tirelessly. They're freedom fighting. They're on the front lines trying to advance it. Still, at the root of that dichotomy is the fact that there is still an existing ideological principle that sort of hedge on white superiority. And it's about who gives in to that versus who doesn't, and how we navigate the two, right, up against the buttress of an ongoing system or a population of white people who are, again, sort of rebirthing and strengthening themselves, against our people.
But it's not just an ideological principle. It's not just a mindset. It's not just a frame. The language being used in the Florida curriculum in Ron DeSantis' state, this language is being used to downplay, to rewrite the systemic exploitation and oppression of enslaved black people. So it's not, again, just an ideological framework. It's not just a mindset, not just a principle that some folk believe in. It's now being codified. It's now being advanced in the literature, in the narrative, in the books that they will allow students to read in Florida and beyond. We'll talk about that part, as we say, when we come forward with Dr. Andrea S. Boyles on Tavis Smiley.
From Leimert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
MC Light for AARP. Hip hop, the cultural phenomenon that took New York by storm in 1973, is celebrating 50 years of rocking mics and crowds. Whether you're a ride or die hip hop head or simply curious about its origins, check out the latest issue of AARP the magazine. It celebrates this incredible milestone with a featured story brimming with fun hip-hop facts and history. Head over over to aarp.org/black community to learn more.
Community is more than where you live. It's the people in it who go above and beyond to help it thrive. During the 50th anniversary of hip-hop and the 75th anniversary of Black Radio, AARP recognizes the members, volunteers, people, and partners giving back to our communities. We believe when our efforts drive change for the greater good, we all thrive together. To learn more about how AARP supports efforts to keep our communities thriving, visit aarp.org/black community.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like Sprinklers in the Rain and Leaky Faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Drip.
Carson, get back!
Hey, I am Jasmine Carson, LSU Women's Basketball National Champion. I had to up my game, and this time I upped my intimate grooming routine too. Venus for Pubic Hair and Skin is the only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area. Featuring a razor with a patented irritation defense bar and a skincare regimen that is dermatologist tested, Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Visit GilletteVenus.com to learn more about the full regimen of products.
Extreme heat increases your risk of heat illness and death. Warning signs of heat exhaustion include muscle cramps, headache, and nausea. Signs of heat stroke include a fever of 103 or higher, confusion, and loss of consciousness. Protect yourself by limiting time spent outdoors, staying hydrated, and staying cool in air-conditioned spaces. Learn how to stay safer from extreme heat at heatreadyca.com. Brought to you by the state of California.
Sounds different, huh? This is Tavis Smiley.
Dr. Boyce just got about 4 tight minutes left in this conversation, which I've enjoyed immensely. I hope the audience has as well. I'm sure they have. Let me close with this, I think. We were talking about this ideological framework that leads to the intersectionality of exploitation for black people historically. We've been talking about the legacy of exploitation and devaluation that continues unabated in this country and, to your point, indeed around the globe, in the diaspora. And yet it seems to me that it's more than just an intellectual framework, more than just a mindset, because now we have the rewriting of history, the history that they didn't want to teach in the first place, but to the extent they do teach it, they want to rewrite it. So the language used in this Florida curriculum specifically that everybody's focused on and talking about is downplaying everything that we've talked about in this hour. What say you about that reality?
So when I talk about racist ideology, I want us to think about that in terms of being like the frame, not just the framework, but like the foundation in which many of these actions have occurred, past to present, okay? Consequential to black people. And so what is happening in Florida and other places in the current that you are referring to, it is about the racist ideology, just the system of belief, right, of whiteness being superior in various ways or being the ultimate dictator of all people and all things concerning people. And so what we see happening in Florida is a manifestation of those beliefs, right? That's a belief system and the manifestation of a belief system. And then the calculation that other people who believe similarly will join in and support it. And support what? Support the idea of furthering policies and practices that erase actual history, that erase or undermine factual information, facts about racism, facts about, black people particularly, those kinds of things. So it goes hand in hand, the belief and then the manifestation of those beliefs. And we can think about it in that way, whether we're talking about slavery from the onset of enslavement and the transatlantic slave trade on through sharecropping and exploitation there, on to the Tuskegee pyramid, the exploitation there, on to the exploitation of the criminal justice system and mass incarceration, environmental harms and hazards that have been very detrimental to Black people, on through entertainment and various racial and cultural appropriations and some. There is, again, this constant hand in glove kind of arrangement where there's a belief in white superiority and white control of all people and all things concerning people, particularly Black people, and how that benefits if you manifest those beliefs and those calculations politically in terms of solidifying predominantly white empowerment.
An unfair question, I promise you. I apologize in advance. An unfair question to ask you with 30 seconds to respond. But will Black folk always be perennially subjected to exploitation and devaluation?
I think under the current circumstances, we don't have to be always subject to political devaluation. There are many ways that currently we can be free and we can live very liberally, and we can find that in everyday actions. We can find that in, long-term strategies. But I think, again, it takes a collective, and that's, like you said, Tavis, that's a loaded question, and I could just, there are so many layers, but there are various ways in which we continue to work individually and collectively as a people to experience liberation and freedom.
It's a good answer for now. Trust and believe we'll have you back on again somewhere down the road. We can unpack a little bit more when you come back on again. But now we celebrate Dr. Andrea S. Boyles, who was at Tulane University, for being the president-elect of the American Association of Black Sociologists, ABS as they call it. Congratulations on that, Dr. Boyles. Good to have you back on this program, and we'll make a habit of this now. Whenever we have a guest on in a city where this nationally syndicated program is now heard, whenever we have a guest on from that city, we will shout out the station on which they listen to us, and that is WBOK 1230 AM in New Orleans. Dr. Boyles, all the best. You're good to have you back on the program.
Thank you. I appreciate you all.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Hour 3 of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network.